The big breaking news on this Wednesday is that Speaker of the House Paul Ryan has announced that he will indeed be stepping down from his position as Speaker of the House. Now, he's not going to do that until after the election. He also will not be running for re-election in his district. He announced it this morning, and here is what it sounded like.
You realize something when you take this job. It's a big job with a lot riding on you, and you feel it. But you also know that this is a job that does not last forever. You realize that you hold the office for just a small part of our history. So you better make the most of it. It's fleeting. And that inspires you to do big things. And on that score, I think we have achieved a heck of a lot.
Okay, so, Paul Ryan is, of course, going to say that because he's leaving. The truth is that Paul Ryan has achieved some things. He has not achieved others. His great dream was entitlement reform. He thought that he was going to be able to save the country from the oncoming train that is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid collapse, which will be happening over the next 10 to 20 years. That didn't happen. He did get tax cuts passed. That's a good move. He was able to pass through revocation of the individual mandate, which is obviously a good thing. He's been able to get rid of some of the regulations that the Obama administration put in place through the Congressional Review Act process. He's gotten a lot of flack as well, and I have a lot of thoughts on why it is that Speaker Ryan is going. But first, I think we ought to review exactly what Speaker Ryan was, because today you're going to hear a lot of people who are on the right celebrating Paul Ryan going, suggesting that Paul Ryan going is going to change the way that Congress does business. He was a milquetoast. He needs to go. Now, listen, I don't think Paul Ryan ran everything as well as things could be run. How could you? The man cut deals with Patty Murray when he was not Speaker of the House, and then he cut a deal with Democrats to pass a $1.3 trillion omnibus package that there is no excuse for passing. But it is important to note that for all of the bad bills that Paul Ryan passed, he also passed a good bill that was rejected by Mitch McConnell. So I think a lot of the ire that's been directed at Paul Ryan really ought to be directed at Mitch McConnell, because here's how the process works. Paul Ryan would pass a very conservative bill through a conservative House, and then it would go to the Senate, and there it would die. And then Mitch McConnell would pass a different version of a bill. And now the question was on Paul Ryan. Do you stand fast? Do you tell Mitch McConnell that you're not going to pass anything the Senate passes? Do you tell President Trump that you're not going to pass something that he wants to sign? Or do you go along to get along, take the hit on behalf of Mitch McConnell, and now you're seen as somebody who believes the same things that Mitch McConnell believes on spending and believes the same things in terms of fiscal priorities that President Trump does? If Paul Ryan can be faulted for anything, it's that he didn't hold Mitch McConnell's and President Trump's feet to the fire. But let's be real about this. The same people who think that Paul Ryan is indeed a milquetoast and a weakling would have been fighting angry at him if President Trump had not gotten things on his desk. They would have blamed Ryan anyway. So in order of priority for people who have not gotten Trump's legislative agenda passed, it goes like this. Trump at the top of the list because he has not had a solid legislative agenda that has been pushed by the White House in any serious way. The turnover at the White House has been too high. The turnover on topics has been too high. The president has not used his bully pulpit to actually stump for legislation in any real and serious way, and he hasn't really been part of the negotiations. So the buck stops with Trump. The second on the totem pole in terms of blame has to be Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell is the one with 51 senators, and he's been unable to get seriously conservative legislation through the Senate. A third on the list is Paul Ryan. And yet people seem to have reversed this polarity. People seem to believe that Paul Ryan is the real problem here when he really is not, and that Mitch McConnell is second on the list, and that Trump, of course, can never be blamed for anything because we can't blame the president of the United States when his legislative agenda doesn't get passed. So how much of this is on Ryan? I think some is. I think a lot is not. Second of all, it's important to note who is going to take Paul Ryan's place. So maybe it'll be somebody from the Freedom Caucus. Maybe it'll be somebody who is more overtly bloviating than Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is a pretty polite guy. Maybe it'll be somebody who's a more compelling speaker, a more charismatic leader than Paul Ryan. And I would suggest that that's going to have to be the case because the high likelihood is that the Republicans are going to lose the House in 2018, which means that it better be somebody who's a fighter. It better be somebody who's going to try and obstruct Nancy Pelosi's agenda as much as humanly possible, considering the great likelihood is that Paul Ryan will be succeeded as speaker not by another Republican, but by Nancy Pelosi, which is a frightening thought in all of its various permutations. But the person who replaces Paul Ryan, you have to wonder whether that person is really going to do a lot better than Paul Ryan, given the fact that Paul Ryan did not do worse than John Boehner. He did not do worse than Denny Hastert. He did not do worse than late stage Newt Gingrich, to be frank. So all of the talk about Paul Ryan being the world's crappiest speaker, I think is untrue. Do I think that he was the world's best speaker? No. I also don't think he was temperamentally cut out for the job. I don't think Paul Ryan wanted the job, and I having met Paul Ryan now, I don't think that Paul Ryan is somebody who is fit for the job, because to be a good Speaker of the House requires a couple of things. One, you either have to be a very canny manipulator. You have to be a Tip O'Neill type, the Democrat from the 1980s, who manipulated his own members, manipulated Republicans in order to get his agenda passed. You have to be very good at manipulating people and fitting pieces together. You have to be more of a Mitch McConnell temperament. sort of a turtle who's able to slowly walk legislation through your House of Congress. That was not Paul Ryan. Or you have to be a great visionary leader, somebody who's charismatic and who has an agenda that is backed by your own caucus. That was like Newt Gingrich in 1994 or Nancy Pelosi in 2006. Somebody who came in with a whole list of agenda items that the caucus agreed on, and you could pass those into law as fast as humanly possible. Paul Ryan obviously did not have that sort of cohesion inside his own caucus, and he is also not a particularly charismatic leader. He's not somebody who stands up and people say, I want to follow that guy into battle. Paul Ryan just was not suited for the job. The reason that Paul Ryan is announcing that he's leaving right now, there are a couple of reasons. One is because he wants to spend more time with his family, but he could have announced this after the election. He could have waited until after the election, then announced, listen, I'm not going to be speaker anymore, so I'm leaving, and I'm not interested in running for re-election. I want to go home, or I want my family to move to Washington, D.C., and I'll work for American Enterprise Institute or something. The reason that he announced this now is twofold. One, Ryan knows that this blue wave is coming. Okay, the indicators are very good that Democrats win the House, and it is quite possible they win the Senate as well, and that Chuck Schumer is the new Senate Majority Leader, and that Nancy Pelosi is the new House Majority Leader, that she's the new Speaker of the House, rather. And that sets up a really bad cycle for going into 2020, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But if you look at the list of Republicans who have left, hey, it's a pretty lengthy list of Republicans who are retiring this term because they don't want to exist in the Nancy Pelosi Congress. Okay, Trey Gowdy is out. Bob Goodlatte, Jeb Hensarling, Rodney Frelinghuysen, Darrell Issa, Lamar Smith, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, Charlie Dent, Dave Reichert, Pat Tiberi, Frank Labiando, Lynn Jenkins, Sam Johnson, John Duncan, Ted Poe, Dave Trott, Ryan Costello, Bill Schuster, Greg Harper, Tom Rooney. Okay, that's a list of Republicans in the House who are retiring this term. And that doesn't even include the ones who are retiring because of various scandals. And there's a Republican in Pennsylvania who retired over a sex scandal. There's a Republican in Texas, Blake Farenthold, who's retiring over a sex scandal. Okay, there are a lot of Republicans stepping down because what they see is that the polls don't look good. So if you're Paul Ryan and you're figuring, okay, we're in serious trouble here, right? That we're probably going to lose the House, and it's really not because of Paul Ryan that they're going to lose the House. Okay, if they lose the House, the high likelihood is because the president of the United States has incredibly low approval ratings, and because Democrats hate him with a passion equal to the fiery, burning, passionate hatred of 1,000 suns. Okay, they hate President Trump, and that means that they're going to show up in November. So if you're Paul Ryan, here's what you don't want. You lose in November, and then everybody turns around and say, it's your fault, Paul. Right? It's your fault that you lost. Why would you bother sticking around for that? Why would you bother doing that? Instead, Paul Ryan is saying, listen, I'll keep fundraising, but this is not on me. Right? I'm not the one who has a 42% approval rating in a time of a booming economy and no serious foreign wars in the offing. Right? That's not me. So I think that Ryan is making a political move. And that's why he is making this statement. Now, also, he says, and I think this is probably true, he doesn't want to lie to his constituents about who's going to serve out his term. Because if he wins re-election in November in his district, which he likely would, and then retires in January, then he's been fibbing to his constituents all along. He has to live with those people. So I think there's something there as well. Now, the rumor that's going around is that Ryan is leaving because Trump sort of defeated Ryan. I don't see this at all. It's important to recognize here that Trump's signal achievements have largely been, outside of the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, they've been done because of Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. Right? Tax cuts were a Paul Ryan baby. The revocation of the individual mandate, that was a Ted Cruz baby. Okay, the Justice Gorsuch and the congressional approval of Donald Trump's judicial nominees, that is Mitch McConnell. So for all the talk about Paul Ryan standing in the way of Trump's agenda, there's really no evidence that Paul Ryan has been standing in the way of Trump's agenda. In fact, it's been Paul Ryan trying to pass Trump's agenda, and he just can't get it through the Senate because he's not a senator. He's not the Senate Majority Leader. I will say, however, that it's pretty clear that Ryan leaving does represent a triumph of Trumpian attitude. Now, people have been mistaking the gaps in policy between Trump and Ryan for the serious gap. That is not the serious gap in the Republican Party right now. The serious gap in the Republican Party is the gap between attitudes. Now, people have seen this as a binary choice between Paul Ryan's sort of polite wonkishness and Donald Trump's punch everything, including the baby, right? These are the two choices. You can either wheel around and you can tweet whatever you want, and you can be wild and crazy and bombastic, and that's the way you ought to approach politics, or you can be milquetoast and Jack Kemp-like in your approach to politics. I don't think that's correct. I think there is a middle ground where you are very aggressive when you need to be very aggressive, and you are polite when that possibility is available. You know, it's something that I try to pursue in my own sort of political rhetoric. But if the Republican Party had to choose one, it's pretty clear that the base chose Trumpian rhetoric over Paul Ryan's rhetoric because they are very angry, and they're very angry because they're very frustrated, and they're very frustrated because no matter how many Republicans they elect, it seems that their agenda is never passed. And they can blame that on Paul Ryan, but the truth is that Paul Ryan is just the head of the caucus. I promise you that if Paul Ryan were the head of a caucus that were all Freedom Caucus guys, then the agenda would look very different.